The air in the grand ballroom was thick with the scent of money and lilies, a cloying combination that clung to the back of Mark's throat. He hated these events, a glittering charade of philanthropy, where titans of industry wrote checks with one hand and sealed cutthroat deals with the other. He only came because his business partner insisted. For 5 years, every day had been a grayscale echo of the one before, ever since Nina vanished, leaving nothing but a gaping hole in his life and a note that read, "I'm sorry." He was just turning to leave when a spotlight caught a woman descending the marble staircase. A gasp hitched in his chest. The dress was different, a river of silver silk. The hair was darker styled with an impossible elegance. But the face, the subtle curve of her jaw, the way she held her head, it was her. It was Nina. And she was on the arm of Adrien Devereaux, a man whose net worth could buy the entire city. The noise of the gala faded into a dull, distant roar, like the sea heard from inside a seashell. For Mark Cartwright, the world had narrowed to a single point of agonizing focus: the woman on the staircase. 5 years, 1,825 days of waking up and reaching for her side of the bed, only to find the cold, empty sheets. 5 years of staring at her photo, tracing the lines of her smile, whispering her name into the uncaring silence of their once shared apartment. Nina. He had replayed her departure 1,000,000 times. The fight they'd had, stupid in retrospect, about his struggling architectural firm, about the risks he was taking. He'd been defensive proud. She had been terrified, pleading with him to take a stable job with a larger corporation. "We're drowning, Mark," she had said, her voice thin with a fear he had dismissed as a lack of faith. The next morning she was gone. The note on the kitchen counter, written in her elegant looping script, was a masterpiece of devastating brevity. "I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. Don't look for me." He had looked. He'd filed a missing persons report, only to have a detective tell him a week later that Nina had withdrawn all the money from her personal account from an ATM 3 states away. She had left willingly. The police closed the case. His friends told him to move on. How could he? It was like trying to move on from breathing. Now here she was. Not the scared, frayed woman he remembered from their last days, but a vision of sculpted perfection. Her raven hair, once a wild cascade of curls he loved to run his fingers through, was now a sleek, dark chignon. The simple cotton dresses she used to live in were replaced by a liquid silver gown that seemed poured onto her frame, shimmering under the crystal chandeliers of the Metropolitan Museum's Astor Wing Gala. She moved with a liquid grace he'd never seen before, a poise that was both breathtaking and utterly alien. And the man whose arm she held, Adrien Devereaux, he wasn't just wealthy, he was a specter in the world of global finance and tech. The CEO of Ethelgard Dynamics, a notoriously private firm dealing in AI and advanced robotics. Devereaux was a modern-day kingmaker, a man who moved markets with a whisper. Mark had only ever seen his picture in the Wall Street Journal, sharp, severe features, eyes the color of a winter sky, and an aura of untouchable power. "Mark, you look like you've seen a ghost," Ben Carter, his business partner, said, nudging him with an elbow. Ben was the reason he was here, hoping to network with potential investors for their small but ambitious firm, Cartwright & Carter Designs. Mark couldn't form words. He just pointed his hand, trembling slightly. Ben followed his gaze. "Oh, right. Adrien Devereaux and his latest acquisition. Word is her name is Nina Valerius, some kind of art consultant. Popped up out of nowhere about 2 years ago. Devereaux is never seen without her. They say she has an eye for undervalued masterpieces, a skill he finds useful. Nina Valerius. Her mother's maiden name. It was a shield, a disguise. A name she'd used to erase Nina Cartwright. To erase him. The blood drained from Mark's face. 2 years. Where had she been for the 3 years before that? What masterpiece had she become that a man like Devereaux would want to acquire her? The question was a venomous serpent coiling in his gut. As they reached the bottom of the staircase, a polite circle of admirers formed around them. Devereaux handled them with an air of bored amusement, a slight dismissive smile playing on his lips. Nina stood silently by his side, her expression a perfect mask of serene neutrality. She laughed at something a portly gentleman said, a light musical sound that was so familiar it felt like a physical blow to Mark's chest. It was the same laugh she'd used when he'd told a terrible joke over breakfast, the same laugh that had filled their small apartment with sunshine. But here in this grand hall it was hollow a performance. He had to get to her. He had to know. "Mark, don't," Ben warned, grabbing his arm. "That's not our world. You'll get yourself thrown out." But Mark was already moving, pushing through the scented silk and tuxedo-clad crowd. The rational part of his brain, the architect that planned and measured, was screaming at him to turn back. But the man, the husband who had lost his other half, was deaf to it. He was fueled by 5 years of unanswered questions of grief that had curdled into a cold, hard knot in his soul. He broke through the circle just as Devereaux was turning away. "Nina," he said. The name felt foreign on his tongue, heavy and rusted from disuse. She turned. For a fraction of a second the mask slipped. Her eyes, the deep hazel he knew as well as his own, widened in shock. He saw it, the flicker of recognition, of pure, undiluted panic. Then it was gone, replaced by a cool, dismissive glance. It was the look one gives a stranger who has mistaken you for someone else. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice smooth as polished marble, and a full octave lower than he remembered. "Have we met?" The 3 words hit Mark with the force of a physical impact. "Have we met?" It was a denial so complete, so absolute, that it stole the air from his lungs. For a dizzying moment he questioned his own sanity. Was this some cruel doppelganger? Had 5 years of longing finally fractured his mind, causing him to project her face onto a stranger? But then he saw it, a tiny, almost invisible scar, just above her left eyebrow, from a childhood fall she'd told him about. It was her, and she was lying. "Nina!" "It's me," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It's Mark." Adrian Devereaux turned his head slowly, his pale eyes fixing on Mark with an unnerving intensity. It was like being examined by a predator deciding if you were a threat or simply an annoyance. He didn't speak, merely placing a proprietary hand on the small of Nina's back, a silent gesture of ownership. Nina's gaze didn't waver. The warmth that had once defined her, the empathy that radiated from her, was gone. In its place was an arctic chill. "I think you're mistaken," she said, her tone final. "My name is Nina Valerius. I believe you have me confused with someone else." "Confused?" Mark's voice rose, colored with disbelief and a rising tide of anger. "We were married for 6 years, Nina. We lived in that little brownstone on Grove Street. You hated the way the faucet in the kitchen dripped. You loved old movies and rainy Sundays. Don't you dare stand there and tell me you don't know who I am." Each detail he spoke was a stone thrown against the wall of her composure. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Pain, maybe even fear, but it was instantly suppressed. She took a small, almost imperceptible step closer to Devereaux, seeking the shelter of his imposing frame. Devereaux finally spoke, his voice a low, cultured baritone that carried easily over the nearby chatter. "The gentleman seems distressed, my dear. Perhaps a case of mistaken identity." He looked directly at Mark, and his polite smile didn't reach his eyes. "Sir, I think it would be best for you to leave. You are causing a scene. I'm not leaving until she talks to me." Mark retorted, his desperation making him reckless. He took a step forward, his hand outstretched. "Nina, please. Just tell me why. What happened?" Before his fingers could even come close to her arm, a man in a dark suit materialized at his side. He was built like a refrigerator, with a blank professional expression and an earpiece snaking into his ear. Devereaux hadn't even gestured yet. His security was there. "Sir, Mr. Devereaux has asked you to leave the security guard," said his voice, quiet but unyielding. His hand rested lightly on Mark's elbow. Nina turned her back on him completely, a gesture of dismissal, more painful than any word she could have spoken. She said something in a low voice to Devereaux, who nodded and guided her away toward a private alcove, leaving Mark standing there with the security guard, his heart hammering against his ribs. The crowd, which had been pretending not to watch, now resumed its conversation. The moment's drama filed away as a minor curiosity. He was humiliated, cast aside, not just by his ex-wife, but by this new powerful world she inhabited. He allowed the guard to steer him toward the main entrance, his body moving on autopilot. As he passed a large ornate mirror, he caught a glimpse of his own reflection. A man in a rented tuxedo that didn't quite fit his face, pale with shock, his eyes wild with a grief he thought he had buried long ago. He looked like what he was, a relic from a past she had bulldozed and built a glittering skyscraper upon. Outside, the cool September air did little to quell the fire in his veins. Ben rushed out after him, a look of profound pity on his face. "Mark, I'm so sorry. I tried to tell you." She pretended she didn't know me, Ben. Mark said the words tasting like ash. She looked right through me. Like I was nothing. Like those 6 years never happened. "People change," Ben offered weakly. "That wasn't a change." Mark shot back, his voice raw. "That was an erasure. Something is wrong. Terribly wrong. That woman in there, she was terrified. I saw it in her eyes for a second. Before she shut it down." He pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling with the screen. He opened the web browser, his mind racing. Nina Valerius, Adrian Devereaux. He had to know. He had to understand how the woman who had cried because a bird hit their window had become the ice queen in the arms of a billionaire predator. The search results began to load, and with each one a new layer of the nightmare was revealed. Adrian Devereaux was even more powerful than he'd imagined. His company had government contracts, defense projects, a web of influence that stretched across continents. And Nina Valerius. The articles were sparse, all dated within the last 2 years. She was described as a brilliant art historian and curator for the Devereaux Foundation. There were photos of her at auctions in Geneva, gallery openings in London, and cultural events in Tokyo. In every picture she was at Devereaux's side, her expression the same placid, unreadable mask he had just witnessed. There was no history of her before 2 years ago. No college records under that name, no social media, no past. It was as if Nina Valerius had been born fully formed in 2023, stepping into the limelight with a past as blank as a fresh canvas. But Mark knew better. He knew the artist who had painted on that canvas before, and he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the original masterpiece had been painted over with a very dark, very expensive forgery. The days that followed the gala bled into a sleepless, obsessive haze. Mark's apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a mausoleum dedicated to a life that was a lie. Every object was a torment. The worn armchair where Nina used to curl up with a book. The cracked coffee mug with a chipped rim that she refused to throw away. He'd preserved it all like a fool, keeping a dead love on life support. Now he saw it for what it was, a collection of props from a play where the lead actress had abandoned the stage mid-performance. He barely went into the office. Ben covered for him, fielding calls and placating clients with excuses about a sudden flu. Mark knew he was squandering the very career he had fought with Nina to protect, but he couldn't focus on blueprints and building codes. His mind was an endless loop of the gala, Nina's cold eyes, Devereaux's possessive hand, the chilling finality of her turning away. His waking hours were spent hunched over his laptop, fueled by black coffee and a gnawing hunger for answers. He plunged into the digital rabbit hole of Adrian Devereaux and Nina Valerius. Devereaux was a phantom. Ethelgard Dynamics was a private entity releasing only the barest minimum of public information. Its board was a collection of shadows, its projects shrouded in corporate secrecy and non-disclosure agreements. Articles spoke of Devereaux in hushed, reverent tones, a visionary, a recluse, a ruthless operator who had bankrupted rivals with surgical precision. He had no wife, no children, and a past that was meticulously scrubbed. He simply was. Powerful. Untouchable. Nina was even more enigmatic. The articles about Nina Valerius were all sterile puff pieces likely placed by Devereaux's PR machine. The Devereaux Foundation's secret weapon, one headline read. The article praised her uncanny ability to identify masterworks authenticating a lost Rembrandt and acquiring a rare collection of pre-war sculptures for Devereaux. She was quoted once a single sterile line, "Art is the purest form of history, and it is a privilege to preserve it." It didn't sound like her at all. The Nina he knew would have talked about the emotion in the brushstrokes, the story behind the artist's eyes. He dug deeper using archival search engines cross-referencing names and dates. He searched for Nina Cartwright, but the trail went cold the day she left. He tried every combination he could think of, every breadcrumb from their life together. Nothing. It was as if she had stepped out of their apartment and into a void for 3 years only to re-emerge as this polished stranger. Frustration was beginning to curdle into despair when he stumbled upon a small, overlooked article in an online art trade journal, Artisan's Ledger. It was a dry piece about the logistics of transporting high-value art. Buried deep in the text was a mention of a collection Devereaux had acquired from the estate of a deceased Swiss banker. The article named the curator who managed the acquisition Nina Valerius, and it mentioned the date the acquisition was finalized, October 14, 2022. The location was Zurich, Switzerland. Mark's breath caught. He remembered that time period vividly. It was the 2-year anniversary of her disappearance. He had been at his lowest point, convinced he would never see her again. On a hunch, a desperate grasping at straws impulse, he logged into his old credit card account, the joint one they had shared. He had kept it active for a year after she left, a pathetic sliver of hope that she might use it, that it might give him a clue. After a year of inactivity, he'd forgotten all about it. He scrolled back through the statements, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. 2021. 2020. All his own transactions. Then he stopped. November 5th, 2020. 3 weeks after she had vanished. A single charge. $18.97. The merchant, Dwayne Reed, 7th Ave and 14th St. New York, NY. It was a pharmacy just 6 blocks from their old apartment. His mind reeled. According to the police, she had emptied her bank account in Pennsylvania the day after she left. She was supposed to be gone hundreds of miles away. But 3 weeks later, she was buying something for less than $20 from a pharmacy in their neighborhood. Why? What could she have bought? Cold medicine Band-Aids. It was a small, insignificant purchase, but its existence was a crack in the foundation of the story he'd been told. He cross-referenced it with the timeline. She was supposed to be gone, starting a new life. 3 years later, she would reappear in Zurich as a world-class art curator. But this single pathetic transaction tethered her to New York, to her old life at a time when she was supposedly long gone. He printed the statement, the flimsy piece of paper, feeling as significant as a holy scripture. He stared at the line item, at the mundane reality of it. It didn't fit with the narrative of a woman who simply fell out of love and left. People who run away to start over don't linger 6 blocks from the life they abandoned to buy aspirin. A new terrifying thought began to take shape in his mind. She hadn't just left. She had been running, hiding. Not from him, perhaps, but from something else. And her reemergence with Devereaux wasn't a triumphant second act. It was the end of the line. He pulled up a photo from the gala, zooming in on Nina's face. He looked past the flawless makeup and the serene expression. He saw the tension in her jaw, the faint dark circles under her eyes that the concealer couldn't quite hide. He saw the subtle rigidity in her posture as she stood beside Devereaux. She wasn't living a new life. She was serving a sentence. The knowledge didn't bring him peace. It filled him with a cold dread. He was no longer just a heartbroken man trying to understand his past. He was a man who had just realized the woman he loved might be in terrible danger. And the man she was with, Adrian Devereaux, was not her savior. He was her warden. The pharmacy receipt was a key. It was small and seemingly insignificant, but Mark knew it could unlock the entire carefully constructed prison Nina was living in. The lie had a flaw, a single point of weakness, and he was going to press on it until it shattered. His first instinct was to go to the police, but he quickly dismissed it. What could he tell them? That his ex-wife, who left willingly 5 years ago, is now with a powerful billionaire, and once bought something from a pharmacy, they would laugh him out of the precinct. Devereaux's lawyers would paint him as a delusional, obsessed ex-husband. He was alone in this. He needed a way to get to her away from Devereaux's ever-watchful eyes and his army of silent, suit-clad guards. A gala was impossible. He needed a different venue, one where her guard might be down even for a moment. He went back to the articles searching for her professional activities. He found a mention of an upcoming exhibition at the Gilded Serpent Gallery in Soho, a chic minimalist space known for showcasing avant-garde artists. The exhibition was sponsored by the Devereaux Foundation, and the collection was curated by none other than Nina Valerius. The opening night was a private invitation-only event, but the gallery would be open to the public the following day. That was his chance. He spent the next 2 days preparing not as a heartbroken ex-husband, but as an architect meticulously planning an intervention. He knew a direct emotional confrontation would fail. She would shut down and Devereaux's people would remove him. He needed leverage. He needed proof that he knew she was lying. He printed the credit card statement. He also found a photo from their last anniversary taken a few months before she disappeared. In it, they were laughing, messy, and radiantly happy. He put both in the inside pocket of his jacket. One was proof of her lie. The other was a reminder of the truth. On the day of the exhibition, a cold, drizzly Thursday, Mark stood across the street from the Gilded Serpent Gallery. He watched as Nina arrived in a black town car with tinted windows. She was alone this time, without Devereaux, but a hulking security guard escorted her from the car to the gallery door, scanning the street with paranoid efficiency. Mark waited for an hour, letting her get settled, letting the initial flow of patrons thin out. Finally, he crossed the street and walked in. The gallery was stark white, the floors polished concrete. The art was challenging a collection of abstract sculptures and jarring canvases. In the center of the main room, Nina was speaking with the gallery owner, her back to the entrance. She was dressed in a severe but elegant black pantsuit, her hair pulled back tightly. She looked every bit the professional, untouchable curator. Mark walked slowly, his footsteps echoing in the quiet space. He stopped a few feet behind her. "The artist has a fascinating use of negative space," he said, his voice calm and steady. Nina froze. He saw her shoulders tense. She didn't turn around immediately, finishing her sentence to the gallery owner in a slightly strained voice, before dismissing him with a polite nod. Then she turned her face, a carefully composed mask of indifference. "May I help you?" she asked, as if he were just another gallery visitor. "I think you can," Mark said, keeping his voice low. "I was just remembering something. November 5th, 2020. I believe you were in New York that day." The mask cracked. A flicker of pure, unadulterated fear flashed in her eyes before she could suppress it. "I don't know what you're talking about. I was in Europe preparing for a fellowship." "Is that so?" Mark said, pulling the folded statement from his pocket. He held it out to her. "Because your credit card seems to remember you being at the Duane Reade on 14th Street, an 1897 purchase." Nina stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. Her face went pale, her professionally applied composure dissolving like wet paper. She snatched the statement from his hand, her eyes darting around the gallery. Her security guard standing near the entrance was watching them intently. "Where did you get this?" she hissed, her voice a frantic whisper. "It was our joint account, Nina. You forgot about it. Just like you seem to have forgotten about everything else." He then pulled out the photograph and held it up. The image of their smiling faces was a stark, painful contrast to the two tense figures standing in the cold white gallery. Do you remember this person, Nina Cartwright? She was happy. She was loved. What happened to her? Tears welled in Nina's eyes, and for a moment the woman he knew was there, raw and vulnerable. You have to stop, she pleaded, her voice trembling. Mark, please. You have no idea what you're doing. You need to leave. Now. Not until you tell me the truth. Why did you leave? Who is Devereaux to you? Are you in some kind of trouble? You think this is about money? She asked, a bitter, desperate laugh escaping her lips. You think I left you for this? She gestured around the gallery at the priceless art, at the life of curated luxury. This isn't a life, Mark. It's a cage. Her admission hung in the air between them, more powerful than any confession. Before Mark could respond, her eyes flickered toward the entrance. The security guard was speaking into his wrist, his gaze fixed on them. Panic seized her features. She grabbed Mark's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into his sleeve. Listen to me, she said, her voice urgent and low. You cannot be here. He sees everything. He knows everything. If he thinks you're a problem, he will eliminate you. I'm not talking about a lawsuit, Mark. I mean eliminate. The cold, hard finality in her tone terrified him more than Devereaux's imposing figure ever could. This wasn't a domestic drama. He had stumbled into something far darker. For your own safety, Nina whispered, pushing the photo and the statement back into his hands. Forget you ever saw me. Go back to your life. Build your buildings. Be happy. Please, Mark. It's the only thing I have left to ask you. Go. And never ever try to contact me again. With that, she turned and walked briskly toward the back office, not looking back. Her security guard took a deliberate step forward, a clear and silent warning. The message was unmistakable. The conversation was over. Mark stood there for a long moment, the photograph and the receipt clutched in his hand. He had his confirmation. She wasn't happy. She was trapped. And her warning wasn't a push away. It was a desperate, terrified plea to save himself from whatever monster had her in its grasp. He walked out of the gallery not with closure, but with a new, terrifying purpose. He wasn't just trying to understand his past anymore. He was going to save her from her present. Nina's warning echoed in Mark's mind, a frantic drumbeat of terror. He will eliminate you. It was the kind of language used in spy thrillers, not in the life of a New York architect. But the fear in her eyes had been chillingly real. He knew he was out of his depth, a civilian wandering onto a battlefield. Going head-to-head with a man like Adrien Devereaux was suicide. He needed help. He needed someone who knew how to fight monsters. He thought of Sam Nichols. They had been roommates in college, two ambitious kids with different paths. While Mark was sketching buildings, Sam was chasing stories, convinced that journalism was a holy calling. He was tenacious, cynical, and had a deep-seated distrust of power. After college, Sam had become an investigative journalist, first for a major newspaper, and now for the Sentinel, a respected online publication known for its deep-dive exposés on corporate and political corruption. They hadn't spoken in years, drifting apart as lives do, but Mark knew if anyone could help him navigate this darkness, it was Sam. He found him in a dusty, cluttered office overlooking a grimy alley surrounded by stacks of paper and the faint smell of stale coffee. Sam looked older, his face etched with the weariness of someone who spends his days looking into the abyss, but his eyes lit up with recognition when Mark walked in. Cartwright. Sam said, a slow smile spreading across his face. To what do I owe the pleasure? Finally designed a building so ugly it's newsworthy. Mark didn't smile back. He sat down and laid it all out. Nina's disappearance, the 5 years of silence, the gala, her cold denial, the pharmacy receipt, and the terrifying confrontation at the gallery. He spoke for nearly an hour, his voice low and urgent. Sam listened intently, leaning forward, his initial joking demeanor replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. He didn't interrupt. When Mark finished, Sam leaned back in his squeaking chair, steepling his fingers. Adrien Devereaux. He said the name tasting like something foul. "You're not just swimming with sharks, Mark. You've jumped into the personal tank of the megalodon." "You know him. I know of him," Sam corrected. "Everyone in my line of work knows of him. He's the ghost in the machine. Ethelgard Dynamics is a black box. They do some legitimate work in AI logistics and software, but the whispers have always been about their other division, the one that handles special projects. Gray area tech, private intelligence things that make governments nervous. He's brilliant, ruthless, and pathologically secretive. Nobody's ever been able to get anything concrete on him. He buries his mistakes, and sometimes he buries the people who find them." The fear that had been simmering in Mark's gut turned to ice. "She said he'd eliminate me." "She probably wasn't exaggerating," Sam said grimly. "So the question is why her, an art historian, doesn't fit the profile of a typical Devereaux employee. There has to be something else, a connection we're not seeing." He turned to his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Nina Cartwright, you said. Let's go back to the beginning. Tell me about her family." "Parents, siblings." "Her mother passed away when she was a teenager," Mark recalled. "It was just her and her father, Dr. Robert Valerius." Sam stopped typing. He looked at Mark. "Valerius. What was his field? Theoretical physics. And later, data science. He was brilliant. A genius, really. Worked for a university, then for a few tech startups. He was always chasing some big breakthrough, something about data compression and quantum encryption. He got obsessed with it after Nina's mom died. Poured all his money and then some into his research. It was a source of tension. He was always in debt." Sam's eyes widened. He turned back to the screen and began a new series of frantic searches. "Robert Valerius," he muttered. "I remember that name." Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the clicking of keys. Finally, Sam swore softly under his breath and swiveled the monitor toward Mark. On the screen was an article from a niche tech forum dated 6 years ago. The headline read, "Valerius Protocol, the Unbreakable Encryption." The article detailed a revolutionary encryption theory proposed by Dr. Robert Valerius. It was dense and technical, but the gist was clear. Dr. Valerius had conceptualized a method of encrypting data that was, for all practical purposes, unbreakable by any current or conceivable technology. It was the holy grail of data security. The article mentioned that Valerius had been seeking funding, but that his work was so theoretical, major investors had balked. Ethelgard Dynamics. Mark whispered, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. They deal in information intelligence. The Valerius Protocol would be worth more than gold to a man like Devereaux, Sam finished. It could secure his own secrets, and more importantly, it could be a key to unlock anyone else's. He could sell it to governments, corporations, terrorists. He who controls that tech controls everything. But the theory was just a theory. Valerius never published a working model. Sam kept digging. He found property records. Dr. Valerius had lost his house to foreclosure 5.5 years ago. He'd been sued by multiple creditors. He was financially ruined. And then Sam found the final piece. A corporate registration document filed 5 years ago, just weeks after Nina disappeared. A new small research subsidiary had been formed under the Ethelgard Dynamics umbrella. Its director of research, Dr. Robert Valerius. The entire horrific picture snapped into focus. He didn't just invest in the father's research, Mark said, his voice hollow. He bought the man himself. The debts were the leverage. And Nina, Sam asked gently. Mark's mind flashed back to her terrified face in the gallery. This isn't a life. It's a cage. The reason she had been so scared about his struggling firm, so desperate for him to find stability. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid for them. She must have known her father was sinking, that dangerous people were circling. She was the final piece of the bargain. Mark concluded the words, tasting like poison. Devereaux trapped her father, and to ensure his cooperation, to ensure his silence, he took Nina too. He didn't want a lover or an art curator. He wanted a hostage. Her disappearance wasn't an abandonment. It was a sacrifice. She had walked into the lion's den to protect her father and to protect Mark from being dragged in with her. Her coldness at the gala, her warnings at the gallery, it was all an act, a desperate attempt to keep him safe by making him hate her. For 5 years he had mourned the loss of her love when in reality he had been the recipient of its most profound and devastating expression. The revelation settled over Mark like a shroud. The past 5 years of his life reconfigured themselves in his mind, the narrative of betrayal and heartbreak replaced by a story of sacrifice and coercion. The anger he had harbored toward Nina evaporated, replaced by a deep, aching sorrow and a white-hot rage directed squarely at Adrienne Devereaux. "So she's a prisoner." Mark said the words heavy with finality. "Her father is working for him, and Devereaux is holding her as leverage to make sure he complies and keeps his mouth shut. It's a classic corporate hostage situation. Just without the ransom note, Sam confirmed his journalistic instincts now fully ignited. Devereaux gives her a gilded cage, a beautiful apartment designer clothes, a glamorous public role as an art curator. It's the perfect cover. To the world, she's his brilliant, beautiful companion. In reality, she's collateral. Her work as a curator. It must be part of it, Mark mused, thinking aloud. She's smart. Devereaux wouldn't waste an asset. Is she just a pretty face on his arm?" Sam leaned forward, a new theory dawning. What if the art is more than just a cover Devereaux deals in secrets? What's the oldest way to smuggle information in plain sight? Hiding things in art in antiquities. It's an old trick. Maybe she's not just acquiring art for its beauty or value. Maybe she's acquiring specific pieces for him. Pieces that contain something else. The idea was chilling. Devereaux was using Nina's genuine expertise as a tool for his shadow operations, forcing her to participate in his criminal enterprise. "We have to get her out," Mark said, his voice steely with determination. "Hold on," Sam cautioned, holding up a hand. "We can't just go storming the castle. Devereaux is insulated by layers of lawyers, security, and wealth. A direct accusation will be crushed. Your word against his. He'll paint you as a lunatic. We need proof. Irrefutable proof of the coercion, and more importantly, proof of his illegal activities. We need a weapon big enough to bring him down." The task seemed impossible. They were two ordinary men against a shadowy billionaire with seemingly infinite resources. "How do we get that?" Mark asked, the weight of the challenge pressing down on him. "We need someone on the inside," Sam said. "Someone who worked for Ethelgard and left. A disgruntled employee. Every tyrant has enemies." For the next week, Sam's office became their war room. They lived on coffee and takeout, poring over every document, every article, every scrap of information they could find on Ethelgard dynamics. Sam reached out to his network of contacts, old sources, and fellow journalists, whispering Devereaux's name into the darkness and waiting for a whisper back. Days turned into a week of dead ends. The wall of secrecy around Devereaux was seamless. Anyone who had ever worked in a high-level position at Ethelgard was locked down by an ironclad NDA with terrifying penalty clauses. Just as Mark was beginning to lose hope, Sam got a call. It was from a burner phone, the voice on the other end distorted and paranoid. The source was a former data security analyst for Ethelgard, a man named Philip Graves. He had quit a year ago, citing ethical concerns, and had been living in fear ever since. He was terrified of Devereaux, but was more terrified of what Devereaux was planning to do with the Valerius Protocol. They arranged a clandestine meeting in a quiet corner of the New York Public Library, a place of public anonymity. Philip Graves was a pale, nervous man who clutched a briefcase to his chest and flinched at every sudden noise. "You don't know what he is," Graves whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "He's not just a businessman. He believes he's above all laws, all morality. The protocol. Dr. Valerius finally cracked it about a year and a half ago. Created a working model. It's everything we feared. A true quantum encryption key. But Devereaux isn't using it for defense. What is he doing with it? Sam asked, his voice a low murmur. He's building a back door. Graves explained, his voice trembling. A master key. While the front-facing encryption is being sold to legitimate clients as unbreakable, Devereaux has a way in. He's been testing it. He can access anything encrypted with the protocol. Financial systems, government databases, intelligence networks. It's a skeleton key to the entire digital world. He's planning to sell the encryption to half the Fortune 500 companies and several allied governments, all while holding the key to their deepest secrets. It's the biggest intelligence coup in history. This was it. This was the weapon they needed. It was bigger than Nina's kidnapping. It was a threat to global security. Can you prove it? Mark asked, his heart pounding. Graves nodded, his hands shaking as he opened his briefcase. He pulled out a sleek encrypted hard drive. I was on the team that audited the system. I found the flaw, the back door. I knew it had to be intentional. I made a copy of the core code along with internal memos from Devereaux detailing his plans for a Phase 2 deployment, a euphemism for when he would start exploiting the back door. It's all here. Getting it out was the hardest thing I've ever done. I've been waiting for someone to come looking, someone who had the guts to use it. He slid the drive across the table to Sam. This will be the end of him. But you have to be careful. If he knows you have this, he won't hesitate to silence you both. Permanently. Mark looked at the small hard drive. It was so insignificant, yet it held the power to topple an empire and free the woman he loved. The path ahead was perilous, but for the first time in 5 years it was clear. He knew the truth of the Devereaux deception. Now it was time for the reckoning. Armed with the hard drive, their silver bullet, Mark and Sam knew a clandestine leak wasn't enough. Devereaux was a master of suppression, capable of killing a story, discrediting a source, and burying the evidence before it ever saw the light of day. To make this stick, they needed to detonate the bomb in a way he couldn't control. They needed a public spectacle. The plan they devised was audacious and incredibly risky. It hinged on forcing a confrontation, on bringing the battle directly to Devereaux in his own fortress. Sam used his credentials to arrange an exclusive interview with Adrian Devereaux. The stated topic was a softball piece on Ethelgard's philanthropic endeavors and the success of the Devereaux Foundation, a topic so vapid Devereaux's PR team couldn't resist. They insisted the interview happen in Devereaux's office on the top floor of the Ethelgard Tower, a skyscraper of black glass and steel that loomed over Midtown. Crucially, Sam insisted on bringing his own technical assistant to manage the recording equipment, Mark. 2 days later, Mark found himself in a high-speed elevator ascending the glass tower. He wore a simple technician's uniform, a pair of glasses, and a baseball cap pulled low, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. In a bag slung over his shoulder was a laptop containing a copy of Graves's data. Sam stood beside him, looking unnaturally calm, his reporter's notepad in hand. Devereaux's office was a monument to power and minimalism. It was a vast space with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a godlike view of the city. There was no clutter, only a large obsidian desk and 2 severe black leather chairs. Adrian Devereaux stood by the window, silhouetted against the sky. And standing near him, holding a tablet, was Nina. When she saw Mark, her eyes widened in terror. She opened her mouth to speak, but Mark gave a barely perceptible shake of his head. Her face paled, but she clamped her jaw shut, her expression turning into a mask of frantic worry. "Mr. Devereaux," Sam began smoothly, "thank you for your time. Let's make this brief." "Mr. Nichols," Devereaux said, his voice as cold as the glass surrounding them. He gestured to the chairs without looking at them, his attention fixed on the city below. As Sam started with his innocuous questions about the foundation, Mark moved to a side table, pretending to set up his equipment. He opened his laptop and with trembling fingers initiated the program they had prepared. It was a dead man's switch. The program began uploading the entire contents of the hard drive, the backdoor code, the incriminating memos, to a secure server controlled by the Sentinel. From there, it would be instantly distributed to every major news outlet in the world and to several government cybersecurity agencies. The upload was on a 10-minute timer. It could only be stopped by a specific code entered on Mark's laptop. "Your work with the Foundation is quite admirable," Sam was saying. "Especially the art acquisitions. Miss Valerius has a remarkable eye." Devereaux finally turned a faint proprietary smile on his lips. "Nina is a singular talent. Her value is immeasurable." He placed a hand on her shoulder and Mark saw her flinch. That was his cue. He stood up. "I think her value is very specific, isn't it, Mr. Devereaux?" Devereaux's eyes narrowed, shifting from Sam to the technician who had dared to speak. Recognition slowly dawned in his cold eyes. "You," he breathed, his calm demeanor instantly replaced by a menacing stillness. "The architect. Security. They can't help you," Sam said, placing his phone on the desk. It was open to a live feed showing the data upload in progress. In precisely 8 minutes, the truth about the Valerius protocol and its rather convenient backdoor is going to become very, very public. Devereaux looked at the screen, and for the first time Mark saw a crack in his armor of invincibility. It was a flicker of pure, unadulterated fury. "What do you want?" he snarled. "It's simple," Mark said, his voice steady, drawing strength from Nina's presence. "We want her, and her father. You will release Dr. Valerius from his contract. You will expunge every debt you hold over him. You will provide them both with new identities, passports, and a transfer of $10 million to an offshore account of their choosing to compensate them for the last 5 years of their lives. You will do this now from your computer while we watch. And if I refuse," Devereaux scoffed. "Then in 7 minutes your company becomes worthless and you become the most wanted man in the world of corporate espionage," Sam stated flatly. "You'll be investigated by every 3-letter agency on the planet. Your empire will crumble to dust before the sun sets." It was a standoff. The air in the room was thick with tension. Devereaux looked from the screen to Mark to Nina. He was a calculator, weighing the odds, the profits, and losses. Nina was a valuable asset, but his empire was everything. With a look of utter contempt, he stalked to his desk. "You will regret this," he hissed at Mark. "The only thing I regret is not coming for her sooner," Mark replied. For the next 5 minutes, under Sam's watchful eye, Devereaux typed furiously. He made a phone call, barking orders in a low, menacing tone. He initiated the wire transfer. He digitally signed a release from all contracts and non-disclosure agreements for both Robert and Nina Valerius. As the final document was sent, the timer on Mark's laptop showed 1 minute remaining. Nina was crying silently, her hand over her mouth. "Stop the upload," Devereaux commanded. Sam looked at Mark. Mark nodded. He walked over and typed in the kill code. The upload ceased. "Now get out of my building," Devereaux seethed. Mark walked over to Nina and took her hand. Her skin was cold, but her grip was firm. For the first time in 5 years, they were touching not as strangers, but as two people who had found their way back from the abyss. "It's over, Nina," he whispered. "You're free." They walked out of the office together, leaving Adrien Devereaux alone in his glass tower surrounded by the ruins of his perfect secret kingdom. The battle was won. But as they stepped into the elevator descending back to the real world, Mark knew the war for their future was just beginning. They had 5 lost years to reclaim a world of trauma to heal and a love to rebuild from the ashes. But for the first time in a long, long time, they had a chance. And this time, they would face it together. Their reunion wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was a quiet, fragile beginning. The weeks that followed were filled with difficult conversations, with tears for the years that were stolen, and with the slow, patient process of getting to know each other again. Dr. Valerius was freed, a man aged by his gilded cage, but grateful for a second chance. There were no grand declarations, just small moments, Mark making Nina her favorite tea, the way she instinctively reached for his hand while crossing the street, the shared silence that was no longer empty but filled with understanding. The world of Adrien Devereux and his dark ambitions faded into the background, a nightmare from which they had finally awoken. Theirs is a story of sacrifice, of a love that refused to be extinguished by power and fear. It's a testament to the fact that sometimes the most profound acts of love aren't the loud and passionate ones, but the silent, heartbreaking choices made in the dark to protect the one you can't live without. If this story of love loss and redemption resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share it with someone who appreciates a story with depth, and subscribe to the channel for more tales that explore the complexities of the human heart. Your support helps us bring these narratives to life. Thank you for listening.